So last week we discussed the Ma'ariv or Arvit, and we did the first half of it. We're in the art scroll today, page 330. And the Ma'ariv for Shabbat is very similar to the Ma'ariv or Arvit that we have every day. The structure is the same. This is just to remind ourselves what we said last time. We have the Baruch. The Baruch is the call to action. We spoke about this idea that it's not only that we count a minyan, 10 people, but it's also, we're talking about a minyan. It means people who are there gathered for the purpose of davening. Okay? It's interesting because the Talmud discusses that issue. And the Talmud says, like, okay, let's assume that you have 10 people, and one is asleep. Can you count that person for a minyan or not? It's an interesting debate. I think that, like, a modern application, yeah, we do have people sleeping also during services today, but a modern application would be, if somebody is on their phone the whole time, are they with us or not? So it's an interesting question. I'm not going to pass in on that, but the idea is that when we have davar shebikdusha, i.e., those prayers that requires a minyan, like Baruch Hu, Kaddish, Kedusha, etc., then it's not enough to have 10 people. It's the 10 people that are there for the purpose of davening. And the Baruch Hu is such tefillah. What is, by the way, significant about that? Okay, so the Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin learns this idea of 10. Okay, from the sin of the spies, right? You had 12 meraglim, 12 spies, right? 2 were telling the truth, 10 did not, right? So from that, the Talmud learns that it means Edah, Kahal, right? That word meaning a congregation is 10. Okay, fine. This is the Talmud. Okay, so we need that. Then after the Baruch Hu, which is the call to action, I called it, we have that what I call the Shema sandwich. We have 2 blessings, the Shema, and another blessing. And actually in the Ma'ariv, it's 2 blessings. In the morning, we have a very similar structure where it's 1 blessing. So let's kind of like zoom out for a second and understand the structure of the Shema. Again, this is just a repeat of what we said last time. We have to, twice a day, we have to say the Shema. Okay, we end up saying it 4 times a day, but that's because of historical purposes, and that it's a later development. From the Torah says, Uveshochvecha, uvkumecha, when you lie down and when you get up, right? And since this is in the context of the Shema, it's in the same paragraph the rabbis in the Mishnah already learns. That means we have an obligation to recite the Shema twice a day, morning and evening. Fine. Therefore, we have the Shema in the Shacharit and in the Ma'ariv. Shacharit usually is around the time we get up, and the Ma'ariv is usually in the evening as we get ready already for the night, right? Okay, so even though technically, it's independent mitzvah to recite the Shema, it's independent mitzvah, could be technically separated from the mitzvah of davening. The rabbis wanted to make our life easy, and they put it together. Okay, so part of our overall service in the morning, our obligation for tefillah in the morning, and an obligation for tefillah in the evening. Okay, let's combine that with the obligation to recite the Shema, and it becomes one. Okay, what is the Shema sandwich? So we have very similar brachot, 2 brachot before, and 1 or 2 brachot. We're going to get to that in a second. After the Shema. This is why I call it the sandwich. You have before and after. So it's like, the Shema is kind of in the middle. So what are the two brachot? We said that the two brachot, either in the morning or in the evening, is more universalistic theme, right? We talk about the luminaries, we talk about nature, we talk about God ruling the world. Basically, nature. Okay, that applies to every aspect of life, and that's also every living creature. We're talking about the luminaries. We're talking about nature. Okay, fine. So we have different brachot in the morning and in the evening. In the evening is more concise. It's smaller. Okay, in the morning it's more elaborated. When we get to the morning, we'll expand on that. The second one, we go a little bit more narrow. We go in. We start to zoom in, right? Because we go into the special relationship that God has with the Jewish people. Say, Ahavat Olam, Beit Yisrael Amcha Ahavta. You gave us the Torah, God. You love us. Okay? So it's no longer we're talking about the whole world, the sun and the moon and like nature and physics and whatever, all that kind of stuff. We go into the relationship, special relationship that God has with the Jewish people. Okay, it's a more narrow way of looking at things. Okay, then which leads us, it's the same trajectory, the same direction into something even more narrow, which is the Shema. The Shema itself, right? Probably the most famous pasuk in the Torah, is a declaration of faith, right? In Judaism, we don't have a creed. In Christianity, they have a creed. This is as similar as it gets. It's a declaration of faith. Yeah. Yes. Where do you think they got this idea from? Of course, from us. So, okay. So now in the Shema itself, we have 3 parshiot. We have 3 sections. Okay, we're going to talk about that more at length when we get to the morning. But basically, in the Shema, we have 3 parshiot. One is the paragraph that is connected to the Shema as it appears in the Torah. What's going on outside today? In the book of Dvarim, right? It's Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and immediately you go to Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha v'chol avavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol me'odecha. The second paragraph is this idea of reward and punishment. Okay? We're going to do the right thing. God is going to reward us in terms of the land, in terms of the rain, and all that kind of stuff. And the third parshiah is the parshiah of Tzitzit. Okay? And the idea is, the rabbis already give that explanation, that the Tzitzit, the blue in the Tzitzit originally, right? And that's what we say in the parshiah here, that there's a blue string in the Tzitzit. The blue is supposed to remind us the ocean. The ocean reminds us the heavens. The heavens remind us Kisei HaKavod, God's throne. Okay, so basically the idea is some sort of a mechanism that's supposed to remind us to keep all the mitzvot. Okay, so there's a declaration, right? I accept God's sovereignty, the yoke of heaven, all that kind of stuff. Wonderful. Then it's I call it instructions, what to do with that, right? When you love somebody, that's wonderful, but you need to figure out some sort of a mechanism how to live with that person also. So this is the manual, this is the instructions. That's the second paragraph. And then what do you do? What are your checks and balances, so to say, so that system stays valid? That's the third paragraph, the way I look at that. Okay, which takes us to the next bracha, and the next bracha is, I call it redemption. We have the same theme of bracha in the morning. And the very end of 2 weeks ago, whatever, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we talked about this idea of redemption in the context of creation, redemption, creation, revelation, and redemption. Right? These are not the terms that I invented. It's Franz Rosenzweig taking the 13 ikarim of the Ani Maamin and crunching it into 3 words. And you can see those blessings, and all this Shema revolves also around those themes. If the first bracha is creation, right? If we talk about the luminaries, we talk about nature, right? And then the second bracha, we talk about the Torah, we talk about the relationship, the special relationship between God and the Jewish people. That's revelation. Revelation is Sinai, right? Okay. And what leads is redemption. And that's what we actually see in the next bracha. That's redemption. Okay, now. And that's basically where we stopped last time, which brings us to the bracha of Hashkivenu. Now, if you remember, when I said the Shema sandwich, I said it's after the Shema, we have either 1 or 2 brachot. In the morning, we have only 1 bracha. It's a longer version, but it's again the theme of redemption, and it goes all the way to the Amidah. The last sentence of redemption, the bracha of redemption, we start Emet, V'yatziv, V'nachon, V'kayam, V'yashar, which is, by the way, a piyut. It's a poem. But at the end of that long paragraph, we end up with Baruch Ata Hashem, Ga'al Yisrael, the Redeemer of Israel. Well, actually, in the past tense, God who redeemed Israel. And what do we do here? We talk about the historic events, right? We talk about Pharaoh, and then we say the splitting of the Red Sea, and we quote the psukim of the Michamocha from the song that Bnei Israel and Moshe sang after the crossing of the Red Sea, etc. Why? Why do we have that? Because it's a reminder that we are experiencing miracles every day ourselves. Perhaps it's not like on the level of splitting the Red Sea, but if we remember those historic events, and we understand that we're experiencing miracles every day. I got up in the morning, that's already a miracle. I didn't get into a car accident, God forbid, that's already a miracle. Hasam nafshenu b'chaim velo natan lamot raglenu. For me, it's a very powerful sentence. How to translate it? Who set our soul in life and did not allow our foot to falter. For me, that's kind of summarize the whole thing. We're part of life. We experience things. We don't even pay attention to some of this. To me, this bracha that we recite twice a day, different versions of it, obviously, is not only about historic events that took place during the Exodus. For me personally, I look at that as an opportunity to acknowledge the miracles and what is going on in my life as well. And that's kind of my approach in Tefillah in general, to try to make it personal. I'm trying to think what from, I think it's from the root of matat, lemotet. Lo natan lamot raglenu, so we didn't crumble. I think that's the shorish. It's not with the taf. It's not lamot, kilu, mavet mit the taf. Okay, so it's from the shorish matat or mut. Okay. Which brings us to Hashkivenu. Hashkivenu is an additional bracha that we have only in the Mariv. In other words, in the Shacharit, we go directly to Gal Yisrael. From Gal Yisrael, we go to the next unit of Tefillah, which is the Amidah. And actually, the Talmud makes a whole big deal out of it, of what we call Smichat Geula LeTefillah. That means that we need to juxtapose the theme of redemption, therefore the bracha of redemption, to what the Talmud calls Tefillah, which is specifically the Amidah, the Shmoneh Esrei. And we're so careful about that stuff that some places, there's a whole debate whether do you say Amen at the end of the bracha or not. Some places have the custom where the Chazan goes really, 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 really softly on the words Baruch Atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael, because there's a debate. If even saying Amen is interruption in that flow between redemption. Okay, that's in the morning. We're very, very. Why? Because the morning is the tefillah, the whole morning tefillah is on a much higher level of obligation than the evening. Remember, we have the morning, Shacharit, because what? It's after the Tamid Shel Shachar, the sacrifice, the morning sacrifice. So since the sacrifice is a Torah level obligation, our tefillah has a certain level of obligation that does not exist in the evening. Because in the evening, as we said, that's what we call, it's the leftovers, right? It's the fat, and then those parts of the sacrifice that continue to burn throughout the night. So it's not, there was no korban, there was no sacrifice in the night. It's just the leftovers. So it's not the same level of obligation. Okay, we said that a couple of times in the past. So therefore, if it's not the same level of obligation, we're not as strict. And therefore, we could add another bracha. And this bracha of Hashkivenu, we find it already in the Talmud. So it means it's very, very ancient. It's actually in the time of the Mishnah. It's very, very ancient. And what's interesting here, when you compare this version, meaning the Shabbat version, with the weekday version, you see that the Chatima, meaning the end of the bracha, is different. Let's take a look. So I'm going to compare the end of the bracha. So it's page 336 at the top with the top of 264. Okay, so kind of like the first sentence on those two pages is still the same. Up until that point, it's the same. Right in the third line or the second line in 336. So far, up until that point, the two, like the weekday and the Shabbat, are identical. Okay, which is not a surprise because the entire Mariv so far is identical. The first blessing of the Shema, the second blessing of the Shema itself, everything is the same like every day. Here, what happens? We say, Yushmor tzatenu vo'enu lechaim ulshalom me'ata ve'ad olam. That sentence is extra. We don't see it in the weekday version. Then we have Ufros aleinu. I'm sorry, that sentence is there in both. I'm sorry. Right, up until here, everything is the same. And then what happens? On the weekdays, I'm looking at the last sentence on page 264 on the top paragraph. Baruch atah Hashem shomer amo Yisrael ad. Blessed are you, God, who protects his people Israel forever. What do we have in the Shabbat version, i.e. last sentence on 336? We have a little addition, Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, and spread over us your canopy of peace. So that's an addition. And then the Chatima, i.e., Baruch Ata Hashem, this is same. Then Haporez Sukkot Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael ve'al Yerushalayim. Those are you, God, who spreads the shelter of peace upon us, upon all his people Israel, and upon Jerusalem. Why do we have those changes? Okay. So, before answering that question, I want to ask a different question. Why we just said that we make a big deal, and the Talmud makes a big deal out of the fact that redemption needs to be connected to the Amidah, to Tefillah. How can we add another bracha? That's an interruption. What are you talking about? Why do we do that? So I said, okay, fine, we're not that strict, but okay, you're not strict, but still, why adding another bracha? Put it somewhere else. So here's the answer of the Talmud. The Talmud says it continues the theme of redemption. So therefore, it's not an interruption. Okay, fine. So we have another bracha. It's not a big deal. It's the same theme. Nobody in the Talmud says that it has to be that bracha of Gaal Israel connected to. It's the theme of Geula. It says Smichat Geula L'Tfilah. Our collective. It's, by the way, it's the same thing. When it comes though to personal things, it's going to be inside the Amidah. That's what we call the personal tefillah. This is a communal. Okay. So, what happens here? This is a classic example of what we call me'ein habracha, chatima me'ein habracha. In other words, I'm adding the theme of the bracha at the end. Look at the beginning of the bracha. I'm in the bottom of 334. Hashkivenu Hashem Elokeinu l'shalom. Lie us down to sleep, God, our God, in peace. Raise us up, our King, to life. All that makes perfect sense. We're about to go to sleep. That makes sense. And spread over us the shelter of your peace. So what are we asking here? Protection during the night. Right? Now, look at the Hebrew. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. Sukat shlomecha? Sukkah. Right? The canopy, the sukkah of peace. Now, what happens later? If you notice, all that stuff, now we're going to develop, but we're not talking about protection at night. It's either for when we are up or for life in general. We're asking for protection for this, from any illness and any bad, all the bad stuff, shield us, remove from us any foe, plague, sword, famine, etc. Remove any spiritual impediment from before us and behind. We kind of like expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding. And so at the end of the bracha, the author decides to go back to the theme, kind of like bring it together. It's like when you write an essay, and it's like towards the essay, as I said in the beginning, kind of like back to the basic idea. Okay? So, that's already the sukkah that we mentioned in the first sentence. He repeats this idea. And not only that, in the Chatima, Hapores Sukkot Shalom, again, this canopy of peace. And here we have a surprise. Ve'al Yerushalayim at the end. What's the connection to Yerushalayim? Why do we have to have Yerushalayim here? What's the big deal? Why not every day? So here's what's going on. After the destruction of the temple, especially the second temple. Bnei Israel are in the Galut. And we need to maintain that yearn to Israel, to Jerusalem, to the rebuild of the Beit HaMikdash. So it becomes, because what's going to happen? They know we're going to be in Galut, they're going to be in diaspora, they're going to be in exile for who knows how long. First generation, they're going to remember. Second generation, okay. Third generation, fourth generation, what's going to happen? We see it, by the way, we see it even now with the memory of the Shoah. Today, it's not what it used to be 50 years ago. So what did the rabbis do? And it's brilliant. We have Tisha B'Av, we have Asara B'Tevet, Shiva Asar B'Tamuz, Tanit Esther, all those fast days, what do we have them? Because even 2000 later, we know on what day Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. But if I ask you on what day was, like, you know, the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto, I'm not so sure that everybody knows Pesach, okay. But I'm not so sure that everybody knows, everybody remembers that 80 years later. But the Beit HaMikdash, everybody remembers. Tisha B'Av, obvious. Because you need to put it part of the ritual. Once it's part of the ritual, it remains. And people remember. It doesn't fade away. So we have many places throughout the tefillah, especially sometimes during the tefillah of the week, like during the week, but especially on Shabbat, where people come together to the shul. Believe it or not, also back then in those days, they had more attendance in shul on Shabbat than on weekdays. So, and you mentioned specifically Jerusalem and the rebuild of the temple and all that kind of stuff. This is one of those classic examples. There's nothing to do. We're not talking about Israel or this is protection. We ask God protection when I'm asleep, you know, later on, you know. What's the connection to Jerusalem? There is no connection to Jerusalem. The rabbis decided this is going to be one of those places. I'm going to tell you in a second why. It has like also a theological explanation. I want to go, you know, I'm just going to share with you another example. Look at page 88. Okay, it's the first blessing of the Shema every day. Okay, middle of the page. So we already know this is the first blessing of the Shema. That means this is a longer version than the one in the evening. But again, we're talking about the luminaries. We're talking about creation. We're talking about nature. Okay? What's the last sentence over there? Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir. What's Tzion? What are you talking about? May you shine a new light on Zion. Zion, that means Jerusalem. What's the connection between? So they make a connection between the light, the luminaries, and the, let's call it messianic light that's going to shine over Zion. Why? There is no obvious connection. They just want to make sure that the recollection, the remembrance of Jerusalem is always on our mind. Yeah. Correct. Because it's not part of the theme. Correct. It's a later addition, correct. What do we have in the Kedusha? Right? In the look at okay, every day in the Kedusha, page 100 in the bottom. So we're going to talk about the Amidah. We're going to talk about Kedusha a lot. But the Kedusha is basically, we're going to sanctify God's name the way they do it in the heavens. We're mimicking the angels. It's all about holiness. It's all about that kind of stuff. Okay, fine. We're quoting verses from two sources Those who were with me here on learning Yechezkel, they recognize that it's one pasuk from Ezekiel, one pasuk from Isaiah. Both talk about the Merkava, not the Merkava, the revelation that the prophets had, that they see, they see what's happening in the heavens with the angels and all the whole thing. Okay, fine. And what's the third pasuk? God, right? God shall reign forever. Your God, oh Zion, from generation to generation. Like, well, what's the connection to Yerushalayim? What are you talking about? Why Yerushalayim? What's the connection? There is no real connection here. I mean, theologically, they made a connection, but the idea is yet another example to show Yerushalayim, Eretz Israel. We're going to be in diaspora. We have to remember Zion. We have to remember Yerushalayim. We have to remember the temple. We have to remember all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's another example. Now, why this emphasis on this sukkah and this protection and all that kind of stuff when it comes to Shabbat? Why not enough? The way we have it in every day. Baruch ata Hashem shomer amo Yisrael ad. Maspik. That's it. Finito. Why do I need to add all this? Again, the sukkah, again, the canopy of peace, again, protect us. Well, what is this idea? What's going on? So the Abu Draham in the 14th century has a beautiful explanation. And he said the imagery is of a shepherd that throughout the week, he's not like, he's with the sheep and the whole thing and whatever. He's not relaxed. Maybe bad animals are going to come, whatever, all that kind of stuff. Shabbat, they're back home. All the sheep are locked up, everything. He can relax. Same goes here. He said, on Shabbat, we can relax. Why? We can rest. We're commanded to rest. Why? Because there's extra protection. We have extra protection from God, whatever that means to you. So to emphasize that, he says, this is why we highlight this idea of protection. This is why we highlight this idea of this canopy, which gives the imagery of this protection. And that's why it happens. And therefore, just like that shepherd is able finally to have a good night's sleep once a week, we can also have that rest on Shabbat. Okay? Now, I just gave you a whole spiel about this idea of juxtaposing tefillah, Geulah and tefillah, redemption and tefillah. Great, fine. So we said, why we have an extra blessing? Oh, it's the same theme of redemption. Okay, fine. But what happens then? Look at the second paragraph on page 336. We have a quote, right? Quote from Sefer Shmot, V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat. We're familiar with that. But that's okay. Let's assume that was a kind of extension of the theme of redemption. Ashkibenu. This is definitely it's got to be an interruption. Why do we have those verses here? Right? It interferes with the float. Well, guess what? Rabbis thought so too. And so the idea of announcing sacred times, Shabbat or holidays, in the high holidays, when we get there, we'll see that there's a pasuk about Rosh Hashanah, pasuk about Yom Kippur. But to announce those sacred times as an intro to the Amidah is an ancient practice that goes already to the Geonim, the time of the Geonim. And the idea is to prepare people for the Amidah. In other words, look, you got to understand that in old times, not everybody had a Siddur. Not everybody had a Siddur. And even my kids, by the way, today, it's like, okay, we go to shul. For them, is it a holiday? Is it Shabbat? It's pretty much the same thing. You know, it's like we don't go to school, we go to shul. Okay, there are differences in the davening, but they don't really pay attention to those differences, right? We go back home, it's like whatever lunch or dinner, it's the same routine. I get it. You can cook on the Chag, you can't do that on Shabbat. I get. Do you really think that they pay attention? Right? So, and guess what? Today we're very much like focused on times and calendars and meetings and in the old days it was not like that. So Shabbat, holiday, was not much of a difference. Okay, Pesach, I get it, you eat matzah. But you know, if it's a Shavuot, trust me, in the old times they didn't eat cheesecakes, okay? It was a Yom Tov, it was Shabbat. It's like you had a Yom Tov meal, a Shabbat meal, it's the same. Where do you see the Mariv is the same Mariv? Where do you see, where is the first time that you see the kind of like the difference? This is unique for the Chag, or this is unique for Shabbat, is in the Amidah, because the Amidah is different. The text of the Amidah, of the Shmoneh Esrei, is different. So we want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So what are we going to do? The Gabbai is not going to go, oh, everybody remember, it's Shabbat today, please. No. That would be an interruption. Remember, it's Rosh Hashanah. No. What's a more classy way to do it? You recite a verse from the Torah that indicate that specific time, whether it's Shalosh Regalim, whether it's Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, or in our case, Shabbat. Now, why this is not an interruption? That goes to a midrash, a very old midrash. And the midrash said that why? Remember, we're still in the theme of redemption. The greatest redemption happened when? The Exodus, Yetziat Mitzrayim. Okay. Why did Bnei Israel, why they were redeemed from Egypt? That's the Torah doesn't tell us. That's a midrash. Because they kept Shabbat. That's a very famous midrash. Okay, so now we see the connection to the theme of redemption. Because of the Shabbat, they were redeemed. So therefore, Shabbat itself is part of the redemptive process. And if that's the case, it's not an interruption.
If the Pharaoh let them keep Shabbat.
Shabbat back then was very different than today because all the laws of the Torah were not yet given. But remember, Shabbat was Kviya v'Kaima Misheshet Yemei Bereshit. Shabbat is already part of our mechanism of our system from time of creation. God rested on the seventh day. So I'm not so sure that, right? So they didn't have that concept of do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this on Shabbat, the 39 melachot and all that kind of stuff, all the prohibitions. But there was a concept of Shabbat from the very beginning of creation. That's a very interesting question, by the way. and there's a machloket there, if that's only applicable to us, to the Jews, or for everybody. And that's actually a point of machloket. It's a debate whether Shabbat is one of the 7 Noachite laws. That means the laws that are applicable to all humanity. So just like, so they might decide to do it on Sunday, okay? No, that happened much later. But this concept of having one day of rest, so according to many, yes. Since Shabbat, that's like what we call the natural way of the world. Yes. Yeah, but that's much later. But the cycle. It was accepted. Correct, but we're talking about those who, let's call it monotheistic religions. You're not going to go into that if you don't believe in God. No, Christianity and Islam. Yeah. But it seems, Shoshana, just a second, but it seems that this idea of, the rhythm of the world, like the nature, that there's a cycle of 7 days, is something that existed way before. Because to our concept is from the time of creation. It's kind of like established a cycle of 7 days. Yes, Shoshana.
In order to name Noah were not yet a monotheistic. So it is for the rest of humanity which did not understand that there should be one God, if there is a God.
Okay.
Then you know that there should be a God. I mean, but it is a very early kind of feeling for humanity or whatever.
Right, but the idea even before.
Why you cannot have the 7th day of rest really for them?
I understand, but the point is that it seems
Modern days, yes.
It's way before modern days. I think it's way before modern days. This idea of like 7 days to the week is a very ancient one, before the Torah. Before the Torah was given to us. It seems it seems that, at least for us, the concept exists since the time of creation. Right? Anyway, so that is how the rabbis explain this idea that V'shamru, that Bnei Israel kept the Shabbat. Because of that, they were redeemed from Mitzrayim. And because of that, those psukim remind us that Shabbat by itself is part of the redemption. And it's not far-fetched to understand how this is on a personal level. Shabbat is part of redemption, right? Because Shabbat, as we refer to it many times as Me'ein Olam Haba, it's a taste of the world to come. Right? So if it's a taste of the world to come, Shabbat, so we understand it's part of redemption. It's the same concept of redemption. Yes. Again, I'm not sure that it translated to this idea of work. They kept whatever they could, right? And they kept this concept of Shabbat. What exactly it meant, how it translate to, I don't know. We don't have any records. We don't know anything. Right? It's like, remember the story that I told you about the matzah? Right? So my theory is that, the matzah started with Abraham already. And therefore, the Jews kept doing that right? I don't know exactly how, what, the laws of Pesach were not given yet. But the concept of having a holiday and having a matzah probably existed before the Exodus of Egypt. It's the same here, right? There was some sort of a concept of 7 days something cycle. I get it. They were slaves. They were forced to work. Okay. I'm sure that they didn't keep the laws of all the 39 prohibitions because the Torah was not yet given. But there was a concept in our tradition as a nation that there is such a thing as Shabbat, whatever that means. Okay? We have make sense? It's part of our identity. Today we think of Shabbat as something very specific. Back then, it was kind of it's part of our identity. I don't know exactly what it meant, how it translated into real life, especially when you're a slave. Maybe the Egyptians all had a cycle. I don't know. But I do know that the Torah starts with the story of creation, and there's a very clear understanding of that cycle and Shabbat as a day of rest. Whether they were permitted to rest or not, that's a different story. And the Midrash tells us that they kept Shabbat, whatever that means. Okay? Fine. I have only like 8 minutes because today I have a hard stop at 12 because I have another meeting. I want to compare that for a second before going in. I don't want to go to the Amid. I want to compare it just that particular point in the service with the weekday for a second. Okay, we're going to go back and forth and, if you look in the weekday Ma'ariv on page 264, you'll see that after the Ashkivenu, we have a long paragraph, which is basically a collection of verses, which is very interesting. So, first of all, number one, this is something we don't say in Israel. We say it only outside of Israel. Why? The whole paragraph. Why? Because this is something that was established in Babylonia, and that was the custom of Babel. In Eretz Israel, they don't say it. Sephardim don't say it also because they follow that custom as well. Now, what is this? Bunch of theories. One, the situation in Babylonia was that the shuls were outside, not in the residential area. They were not permitted to build them. Or they daven Mariv at the end of the day, while still outside in the fields or whatever, right? It's like go lunchtime to Century City. You have minyanim downstairs, like in the lobby of buildings, right? It's the same idea, especially in New York, right? At the end of the day, it's time to daven Mariv. The people get together in whatever, some location outside. They daven and then they walk back home to the village. Okay. So what happens? It's dangerous to walk alone at night. The rabbis wanted to prevent that. And now we have a bunch of theories why we have those verses. Theory number one says, well, some people takes them longer, the Amidah. We don't want to make people, have you seen people like at the end of the workday? They run home. No, they run. So they don't want to wait for their friends. What's going to happen with those who daven slower? They're going to get stuck and they'll have to walk by themselves. We're going to see, by the way, something like that. I'm giving you all that intro because next week, hopefully, we're going to deal with the same phenomena with the Shabbat. So the rabbi said, you know what? You're done with your Amidah quickly? Great. Here's more material for you. Kill the time until your friends finish so you can walk together, because I don't want anyone to walk alone at night because it's dangerous. Another theory says there were times in history when we were not allowed to say, we're not allowed to daven specifically, and that's the Shmoneh Esrei. And therefore, the Shmoneh Esrei was replaced with that paragraph. So if you will see in that paragraph, there's 18 verses parallel to the 18 blessings of the Amidah. So that was instead. And theory number 3 says, again, because we want to make sure that everybody finish at the same time, those who are late, because some people are late and we want everybody to be together in the tefillah, so they instituted those verses, and then those who are late, going to cut them and go directly to the Amidah. So it is extra material that people can have a shortcut, and so everybody go to the Amidah together, they daven, and they walk home together. Any of those theories, whatever. Now, on Shabbat, we don't have that. We're going to have that issue, just going to give you a heads up, after the Amidah. So go back to the Shabbat Mariv, Friday night Mariv. We are on page. So now, after the Amidah, look at page 346. From the middle of the page, all that stuff, what we call Bracha Me'ein Sheva, the 7th facet blessing, all that section was instituted by the same rationale. Some people are late to shul. Some people take longer time for their tefillah. Either way, we need to make sure that everybody's going to walk back home from shul together, so it's going to be safe. And therefore, we're going to see that next week. After the Amidah, we have this section that, yes, it's not only a time killer, it has like theological and halachic significance and whatever. We're going to talk about it. But I'm saying like that was kind of the idea behind that. So it's a kind of a parallel to those psukim that we saw that we have in the weekday. Yes. Not in the evening.
Yeah. So
Correct. But now we're talking about Mariv. Mariv, there's no repetition.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point. What do I do if I have no repetition? I want to make sure that I don't have that time of the repetition, right? So what do I do to make sure that everybody's going to finish together and walk together? Okay? That's exactly the point. You're exactly right. In the morning, I don't have that issue. At Mincha, I don't have that issue. And this is why I don't have those verses. And I don't have this Me'ein Sheva in the morning. The rabbis had to come up with some sort of innovative solution to make sure that people are going to be safe at night. Okay? Very good. Okay. Next week, we didn't go that far with Amar, but that's okay. We're not in a hurry. It's okay. Next week, we're going to go into the Amidah for Shabbat. This is the first Amidah. The Mariv is the first Amidah. How many Amidot we have during Shabbat? 4. Every day we have 3, Shacharit, Mincha, and Arvit. On Shabbat, we have also Musaf, right? So we have Shacharit, Mincha, Arvit, we have Musaf. We have 4 Amidot, and something really, really unique about the Amidot. So if it's today, it's Tuesday, right? So last night, this morning, and this afternoon, I'm going to have exactly the same Amidah because it's Tuesday. On Shabbat, every Amidah is different. That's the only day. On a Chagim, also, I'm going to have Shacharit, Mincha, and Arvit is going to be the same Amidah. Even if it's a Yom Tov, even Rosh Hashanah, even Yom Kippur. Shabbat is different. Every Amidah is different. And we're going to analyze and we're going to understand why. That's going to be next week. Okay. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.